Just a second. Okay, welcome everyone to the first session of Understanding Microclimates. I will now read a brief description of the seminar and a brief bio of William. So, in this seminar, we'll be studying microclimates. Microclimates are regions of heightened atmospheric variability that generate divergent forms of life. The seminar asks what becomes possible if we expand our understanding of microclimates to include the immaterial alongside the elemental. To approach this question, we will enter into several microclimates where thought, image, and sensation interfuse with a shape with and shape variations of the surrounding environment. Our instructor is Will Scarlett. He's a writer and researcher interested in phenomena of presence between the sensory, virtual, imaginary, and ecological. His current project, Being There and Not There, explores how humans are cultivating presence in a highly mediated world, often in ways that reconfigure social boundaries around the real. His writings have appeared in the Senses and Society, the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, Future Studies, and Hyperion on the Future of Aesthetics. Thank you, and take it away, Will.
All right, thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. It's great to meet you. We'll do introductions a little bit later, but I just want to say it means a lot that this resonated enough for you to be here. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to collaborating. Yeah, I do see this as a collaboration. So I'm hoping that this can be helpful for you and that we can have more open-ended conversations where everyone can kind of communicate with each other, not just with me. But yeah, I'm happy to see where it goes. But to start things off, I think I'm supposed to jump right into the presentation. So I'm going to present some ongoing writing. Some of it I have presented before, so if it's familiar to you, it is a little bit different. It's sort of evolving. But then I will, after that, present a short film, just about a minute and a half clip by Ali Eslami, who's an artist who'll be joining us in the next session. And then a little bit of writing based on that that's totally new and I haven't presented before. But yeah, to start things off, I'll share my screen. And I will present some writing called Inward Climate. Or sorry, it's actually, first I'm going to present some writing called Climate of Spectacle. Did I share my screen?
Not
Yeah.
yet.
Okay, one second. Okay. Nestled in the hills sweeping down to the city and into the sea, there is an old theater made of brick the color of the surrounding earth. Two cypresses stand beside the entrance of weathered cement columns and glass, doors wide open. No one is around but birds fluttering in the atrium, empty except for a folding table below a mural of some kind of festival. Freddie Mercury must have seen this when he came here in 1988 to rehearse, walking right past it with Montserrat Caballé before the British rock star and Catalan soprano sang together at the Magic Fountain of Montjuic to promote the Barcelona Olympics. I had this perfect dream. Un sueño me envolvió. This dream was me and you. Tal vez estás aquí. I want all the world to see. Un instinto me guiaba. A miracle sensation. My guide and inspiration. Now my dream is slowly coming true. A spectacular and moving performance that would also be his last. Before arriving here, I did not know I was making a pilgrimage to a minor temple of Mercury. The theater is part of the Universitat de Barcelona's Mundet campus and home to the experimental virtual environments for Neuroscience and Technology Lab, or Event Lab. It was empty because the lab had gone out to breakfast together as they do each morning. That Freddie rehearsed here was one of the first things I learned when they got back. I had come to Barcelona to be immersed in the lab's research on virtual presence, commonly described as a multisensory experience of being there in a simulated body and environment. Using immersive virtual reality technology and a range of sensory techniques, the lab generates experiences of presence that displace participants from their physical bodies and environments into virtual spaces and avatars. This presence is often powerful enough to affect participants below the threshold of conscious awareness, allowing them to experience, in Dr. Soleil Nere's words, different patterns of perception, not the usual patterns of your body. Soleil guided me through some of the lab's VR experiences, including a virtual out-of-body experience, a self-counseling program where participants converse with themselves across a virtual table, and her recent experiment on body dysmorphia. Soleil and her collaborators have observed that sensory immersion in other virtual bodies and environments can disrupt participants' perceptual reflexes and habits, opening their senses into new configurations and allowing their perspectives to become less static and enclosed. As she covered my eyes and ears with the VR headset, she said, "There's a permeability of the self that you can play with in VR." Soleil's description of virtual presence as a mode of permeability of the self via the senses resonates with another concept that reconfigures the boundaries of self and sensorium through media, which Susan Buck-Morss calls synesthetics. For Buck-Morss, perception happens in two opposing modes: the synesthetic, in which the senses form open and porous connections between the nervous system and surrounding world, and the anesthetic, in which the senses close off and numb the organism to its environment. She suggests the hypermediated and image-saturated conditions of much of contemporary life have mostly anesthetized us, isolating us within ourselves and alienating us from our bodies, our surroundings, and each other. The purpose of synesthetics is to undo the alienation of the corporeal sensorium, not by avoiding the new technologies, but by passing through them. Thus, while synesthetics does not depend on technology, certain technological practices may open sensory passages from anesthetic states of alienation into broader synesthetic fields. Synesthetic experience can happen when a medium channels the flow of our sensations in a new way, shifting the boundaries that have solidified between us and our worlds in favor of renewed permeability and presence. When an experience, perhaps a virtual one, heightens our sensory awareness, sensitizes us to our body or another's, or reconfigures our body's form, movements, appearance, and identity, we may start to perceive ourselves and our surroundings differently. That is not to say VR often does this, but when used synesthetically, it has the potential to immerse us with a similar revitalizing feeling as dreaming of a strange and beautiful city, or as Selene recommends, walking in the forest and swimming in the sea. Ever since falling asleep somewhere over the Atlantic, I felt like I had been dreaming. Standing that evening on a terrace in Sants, watching the swift swirl among the treetops, my hosts asked why I came to Barcelona. Was it for Sonar, the massive electronic music festival? I've never heard of it. Then it must be for Nit de San Juan. What's that? A traditional midsummer festival with fireworks and bonfires all night on the beach. They had laughter in their eyes when I told them I came to do research. A few winding blocks from their apartment is a mural honoring the centennial of La Vaga de Canadensa, a general strike that spread across Catalonia in 1919. The crowd of red and black marches larger than life across a warehouse wall. Sants is an industrial neighborhood with a strong history of organized labor. It is the setting of Victor Serge's revolutionary novel, Birth of Our Power, depicting a failed uprising of 1917, and home to Squatter Community Center Convalescing, which was defended from eviction by riots in 2014. Rising over all of this and blocking out the sea is Montjuic, a rocky fortified hill Serge knew as a prison that is now the site of the Olympic Stadium. From Montjuic, you can see the entire city spreading out from its base, the unfinished spires of Gaudi's Sagrada Familia, Cathedral of Photos, the labyrinth of Bari Gothic, outfitted with Gothic facades for the 1929 International Exposition, the pandemonium of skaters on the Machpas steps, the rare straight line of La Rambla leading down to the harbor, Catalan flags hanging defiantly from nearly every window in Barceloneta, while migrants sell €1 beers and foot massages to tourists crowding the beach below. The hill behind Gracia, where I first sensed an aroma with my whole skin, an herbal message wrapped around me on the wind. The distant summit of Tibidabo, where the outstretched arms of Jesus extend over 100-year-old amusement park. And all the multitudes I will never know and cannot begin to describe, being little more than a tourist myself. Several miles southwest along the coast is Platja de Castelldefels, a communal open-air bath of sun and sea. Clothing is basically optional, and everyone comes here to be cleansed of their tensions, insecurities, and inhibitions. Floating in the surf, you can catch a glimpse of the shimmering distance Arthur Rimbaud, who once imagined a synesthetic language named eternity, and imagined from way out there we would probably look similar, a mirage of glistening bodies. Roberto Bolaño used to work here as a campground attendant, and I wonder if he found the job stimulating. He recalls the nocturnal experience of walking this phantom coastline with a feeling like jet lag, an odd sensation of fragility, of being there and not there, somehow distant from my surroundings. On calm nights, you can almost hear the pulsing bass from over the horizon on Ibiza. That island, now sculpted by a different vision of paradise, was also a home in exile for Walter Benjamin during World War II. Benjamin, whose ideas inspired Buck Morse's notion of synesthetics, developed his concept of mimesis wandering its hills. He sensed a universal tendency to imitate in all beings, evident in words, images, myths, dreams, sensations. Experiences are lived similarities. Through sensory experience, our bodies take on the form of our surroundings. We become an image of our environment. Since the world we experience is the movement of our becoming similar with it, such experiences open fluid and porous spaces of contact, responsiveness, and metamorphosis. This interplay of resemblances can also carry us beyond the world through the imaginal power of the storyteller. He became aware that his imagination had made itself independent of him and, poised against the broad slope that paralleled his path in the distance, had begun to operate on him of its own accord. Like a virtual environment that, rather than being generated by technology, is immanent to the landscape, Benjamin senses the presence of imaginary phenomena appearing outside himself and moving through the atmosphere. While stories like Benjamin's In the Sun allow us to embody an intense mode of synesthetic presence amid the earth and plants of a bygone Ibiza, we can still feel it all around us in the phantasmagoric climate of Barcelona. The difference is that now it has been commodified as spectacle. Guy Debord warns, the spectacle erases the dividing line between self and world, in that the self, under siege by the presence/absence of the world, is eventually overwhelmed. Like Buck Morse's concept of anesthetics, the spectacle absorbs us in immersive projections that conceal the techno-capitalist exploitation underlying them, further alienating us from the world and each other, and spiraling us ever deeper into an image of harmony set amidst desolation and dread. They are cheap imitations of the ways of life they systematically appropriate and destroy, corrupt vestiges of synesthetic experience, offering only mystical self-abandonment to the transcendent spirit of the commodity. And commodities do surround us, infusing our relationships, desires, and perceptions. Commodities are now all there is to see. This is especially apparent in Barcelona, where the so-called experience economy is more or less ubiquitous. Through every conceivable variety of intoxication, the city, to borrow Frederick Jameson's words, releases this present of time from all the activities and intentionality that might focus it and make it a space of praxis. Thereby isolated, that present suddenly engulfs the subject with indescribable vividness. Jameson's notion of presence as sensuous experience outside the space-time of capitalist labor would seem economically useless, unless presence itself could be commodified and sold to us. One way the commodification of presence has already taken hold is through its simulation as phantasmagoria. Phantasmagorias, in Buck Moore's sense, are immersive projections that harness the senses to aestheticize and compensate for an increasingly unlivable reality. Their appearance coincides with the disintegration of synesthetic experience and its potential for finding alternative ways of connecting with and responding to the surrounding world. She writes, "The original field of aesthetics is not art but reality. But the widespread transformation of synesthetics into anesthetics began when a narcotic was made out of reality itself. By immersing the sensorium in a total anesthetic environment, phantasmagorias worsen the sensory alienation they seem to relieve, expanding the distance between aesthetic experience and its realization in shared lived conditions." Then again, the boundaries separating illusory technological projections from reality is not always a clear or accurate one to draw. For example, Maria de Abreu analyzes how bodies, atmospheres, and media converge in a Brazilian Catholic charismatic church to produce a powerful form of religious presence. The services generate mystical enrapture through collective practices of breathing, singing, and splashing water to stimulate goosebumps. She observes, precisely due to their strong associations with naturalness and with preconscious affectual bodily response, the stimulation of goosebumps has become the aim and intention of new technologies of media and special effects. Because goosebumps are involuntary and seem to electrify the air around our skin, they are taken to be effects of revelation, of being caught up by a divine unknown, even when they are technologically induced. For a medium to generate this kind of presence, where intensified embodiment coincides with ecstatic self-loss, Barbara Baert suggests, rather than a projection that surrounds us, the medium becomes an act of dissolving, of vaporizing. Barcelona is designed for us to lose ourselves in. As it carries us away on aromatic currents of a dream, the city as medium dissolves our boundaries and vaporizes us into the air of the spectacle. And the most valuable commodity of this experience economy is certainly its climate. The water company Aguas de Barcelona sponsored the VR experience Zone of Hope, which places us in the flooded Plaza de España of a dystopian future and makes us feel the heat of the Biles Reservoir turned to desert. They say there's only one way to halt climate change, and that's by experiencing it. Free for water customers and 15 euros for everyone else, the experience claims to help the climate through what is probably the only way they know how: a tourist attraction. The awareness that even our most profound experiences of presence may be commodified in ways that harm the world is deeply alienating. A sense of this alienation comes across in another VR simulation I experienced at the event lab: Dr. Geoffrey Goris's experiment on social paranoia. Participants watch their avatars wander across a desolate, futuristic cityscape, rebuffed by group after group, and then perform the same actions themselves. While loading up the experience, he showed me another virtual environment he has been working on in his free time: a forest clearing where participants can approach the sword Excalibur as the seasons change around them. Geoffrey grew up in the woods of northwest France, and while living in Barcelona, preferred to stay in the hills. He told me that what draws him to VR is its potential for virtual embodiment and the ability to be immersed in the worlds he creates. As we climbed above the city between an earth and sky that seemed to touch in the ever-expanding horizon, he said he never takes pictures because they take us out of the moment. Selene also often walked these hills through the forest surrounding the lab. She told me she experiences a special kind of presence here, which she sometimes amplifies using the mindfulness app Headspace to help make her senses wide open. For Selene, this presence is not only a perceptual phenomenon, and although it could be considered yet another form of sensory displacement, it can never be completely simulated. She explains, if you were immersed in a virtual forest, your sensory channels would accept it because the audiovisual integration would mimic what you would experience in the forest. But the essential difference is that in the forest, you're present with other living beings. Even when they include technology, Solene's synesthetic walks in the forest are about connecting with the living environment around her. A shared presence she acknowledges may be difficult to measure or explain scientifically, but that can be immediately felt. Everyone I encountered while immersed in this climate of spectacle was responding in one way or another to media's potential to overspill the boundaries of the alienated sensorium, a potential it seemed to share with Barcelona itself. We were all experimenting with various forms of multisensory presence to blur the supposed limits of the real, whether defined by a materialist technoscientific paradigm, the endless stream of commodified images surrounding us, the social failure to promote supportive connections with each other and the world, or simply the conditions of our own lives. But everywhere technology creates passages towards synesthetic modes of sensitivity and responsiveness, it also provokes the appearance of anesthetic phantasmagorias that capture and enclose the senses. Rather than placing us in contact with an objective reality situated beyond our varied subjectivities, the sensory openings catalyzed by synesthetic techniques were closely linked with the imaginary and virtual. What distinguished the synesthetic from the anesthetic in this context was that our sensory permeability allowed for intensified participation in apparently virtual aspects of the surrounding world, neither limited to technology nor our individualized selves. More than articulating the condition of selfhood as being perpetually suspended between material and immaterial realms, synesthetics reveals that sensory connection and presence, as well as the formation and transformation of selves, happen through processes that interweave the imaginary and virtual with the material and real. Perhaps concepts and experiences of presence are so common in this context because rather than being there, we are living in a constant tension of being there and not there. Just as synesthetics calls for resisting sensory alienation by passing through technology, synesthetic presence becomes a practice of cultivating experiences of being there and not there, by channeling them into more porous and permeable modes of shared perception. My last night in Barcelona was Nit de San Juan. The Festival of Fire celebrates the birth of John the Immerser on their summer solstice and descends from medieval and pre-Abrahamic rituals. I was warned the crowds of the city would be unbearable, so I went with a few lab members to a coastal town to the south. As the fires burned at the edge of the oceanic abyss, I experienced a more lucid and impersonal version of what Mikhail Bakhtin calls the festive perception of the world. Instead of joyful abandon and familiarity in the company of revelers, I felt intensely that for now we are here together in this place of sand and stars, fire and water. The rest is darkness. Despite its ambivalence, corruption, impossibility, and perhaps inevitability, I still feel a consuming desire to keep this sense of presence alive, like so many sparks of the carnival bonfire which renews the world. The embers faded while our bodies slept dreamlessly on the beach, and in the morning I was gone. All right, so thank you for listening. Um, I'm going to share a link to just a short video clip. I think moving forward, we have to share the links in the chat for videos um, instead of showing them on the main meeting. So I'm just going to share this with you, and it's only a minute and a half. It's a link to a Dropbox, so you can just please go ahead and watch it on your own, and then we can meet back here in a couple minutes. But this is a short clip by Ali Aslami, who's going to be joining us next week. But I just wanted to share it because it sort of inspired the next little bit of writing that I wanted to present before we get into discussion. Okay, hopefully that was enough time. So I'm just going to share my screen again. And the images are just some screenshots from the short film. So this is just a short writing called Inward Climate. The edges of perception are not like the outlines of a body. Bodies, while porous, are more clearly defined and closed in on themselves. But perception, which is often thought to dwell within the body, always seems to exceed its bounds. This is why there is so much uncertainty around where perception ends and the world begins. The edges of perception are more like the boundaries of a forest, indefinite, shifting. They are not easy to enclose, since they open onto imaginary as well as physical spaces. In a similar way, they are difficult to express or describe without being fit into artificial forms. Like a forest, perceptions can only be experienced from within. To understand this within calls for a different sense of inwardness than what is thought to be contained within the individual subject. Inwardness that is framed in terms of individuality is too limited. It constantly runs up against external reality, apart from which it becomes a solitary refuge or prison. The world gets divided in two, where escaping from one side can only lead into the other. The inwardness of a forest is not individualized and cannot be opposed with an external reality. Instead, it is a space of immersion. Surrounded by movement, one arrives at this inwardness the same way one enters a dream, unexpectedly and completely. And like a dream, the forest's inwardness has no outside. This is partially because forests are open to the sky, the underground, the currents of the air. This is also because if someone stood at the forest's edge and pointed deeper, they could not point to a kernel of inwardness they found there. They could only gesture toward the possibility of being absorbed into that climate, as into another world. The inwardness of perception cannot be pointed to either, but its limits can be felt when it does not resonate with another. In these moments, it is forcefully returned within the outlines of the body. Perhaps a fear of this dissonance is the origin of the need to pose an external objective reality. It is the first step toward enclosing inwardness within the individual. The inwardness of the forest is a collective inwardness. Its boundaries are ambiguous because it is composed of many beings. In its atmosphere, mixtures proliferate, regardless of human distinctions. And even though it is not always hospitable, it opens a space for others to enter, transform, and move on. As two modes of inwardness, could the inwardness of perception and of the forest meet? Between the forest and perception, there may be an intermediate element. This element would emerge where perception and the forest begin to interfuse, each taking on the qualities of the other. It could be described as a kind of immaterial living substance, an elemental image. It would appear as a sensation that cannot be contained within any individual, a sensation that exists not as a subjective impression, but as an elemental feature of the climate. Who hasn't sensed something like this within the forest, amid the swaying and shimmering of leaves? Where the forest and perception immerse each other, they are joined through this element. Together they form an inwardness that is as much beyond the self as it is beyond the real. An imagistic power of the world that, like the perceptions of a body, always seems to exceed its bounds. An inward climate. All right, so that's it for the presentation. Thanks again for listening. Um, so at this point, we can go ahead and open it up to discussion. I know we're going to have introductions a little bit later on. But yeah, it's great to be here with you. And I noticed in my background, I have a couple of plants, and it's nice to be joined by them too. But I hope they're doing okay. It's been a rough winter for all of us. They're hanging in there, hopefully, like we all are. But yeah, please feel free to bring any response or questions or thoughts of any kind. Please feel free to share.
I can share something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mm, okay, it's it might be a little loosely relevant, but I think your first reading was really on point for just what I've been thinking about recently, especially in regards of like I just came in, I was traveling today, and I literally just got back before this class started, and it's like the first really hot day after winter, and it's getting me excited because I'm ready to go to the beach, but it also just had me thinking like oof, it's getting dangerous, it's getting real dangerous. That heat's getting dangerous. And it just made me think of like, you know, bottle of water costs $4. And I'm from the United States, by the way. So bottle of water costs $4. Like, what makes you think you're always going to be able to afford it? And it's just like these kind of false blankets of security. I like kind of not I, but like collectively, like this notion of just whatever, I guess. Where it's just like it's just like I can't find the word for it, but it's just like, man, what are we gonna do? I guess that's just like what are we gonna do? Because I can't afford it. It's getting worse. What's going on? It also just made me think a lot about embodiment and other words for non-scientific knowledge. And it made me think specifically about how the English language, like kind of the way the English language works within modernity is really interesting because there's a lot of words lacking in like feelings, forms of feeling, and there's also a lot of words that lack outside of science. And it just makes me think a lot of like, the faith that is had in the construction within science, um, and how it's followed and it's continued to be believed, and that's technology and innovation, this continually cycle. But then when we ignore, we have no words to explain our internal knowledge besides like intuition and embodiment. And like those are the few I can think of off the top of my head. And I just wonder how much that plays in the cycle of kind of like this construction and thinking about all these layers and mechanisms that have me now sitting outside thinking, wow, it's getting hot, ready to go to the beach. Bottle of water costs $4. So that's what you got me thinking about.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Oops, I turned my camera.
I see somebody else has a hand raised, so feel free to jump in. We don't even need to do hand raises, honestly, unless you want to. Just go ahead and jump in.
Thank you. My name is Gia Del Pino. I'm calling from Tucson, Arizona, in the United States. Um, I was really struck by both readings and pieces of writing, particularly this last reading that you shared. And I was wondering if you can uh, unpack a little bit about what you meant by, or I wrote down this quote, the inwardness of the forest is a collective inwardness, and what you mean by inwardness in general and the context of this piece. And if I just may share a little bit why this piqued my interest and to see if it's related at all. Forgive me, I'm like forming my thoughts. I'm reflecting out loud. Um, but I've been really interested in what Mick Smith, who's, his scholarship might be a little bit outdated at now, but some of his concepts remain salient to me. He calls the ethics of place. And I just want to read a quote from his book, An Ethics of Place, Radical Ecology, Postmodernity, and Social Theory, from 2001. He says, an ethics of place, i.e., environments, reconnects moral and physical spaces in such a way as to subvert our present ethical agendas. Um, yeah, this is related to some of my research that I'm doing right now, some curatorial work that I'm doing right now with someone else, where we're putting out a vast call to what I'll just say now because it's, back to Shakori's point, like language is so fraught, the Southwest, but we're not really using these like these terms, but just so that we can locate this project about you know, uh, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, this region where historically there's been a lot of projection of like colonial fantasies, and even now some as well as across the gamut, like whether it's to do have like adventurous space endeavors and like or the biosphere here in Tucson, as well as like nuclear proliferation and experimentation, so on and so forth. And so what does it mean for artists to come together to express an ethics of place through their conceptual work or their more formal work? What kind of new aesthetics are emerging when coming together, and not only just through their individual practices, but in the collective show as well. So that's why this inwardness of the forest as a collective inwardness really piqued my interest. Apologies for the long-winded explanation.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. And there's so much connection between both of these responses. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's way more than I can fully unpack on my own, but I hope these are questions we can keep exploring together. I feel like what comes to mind for me, just based on what both you both brought up, is this sense of, I guess, the way that different experiences and different kind of physical processes and social processes are mediated in different ways, a lot of ways that we just take for granted often, and trying to reimagine kind of how those mediations can happen, whether, elemental sort of need for water or language, different ways that we kind of share our inner experiences, through technology or through different social practices, even bringing to mind, like you mentioned, like colonial fantasies and things, these kind of like projections that we already find ourselves entangled with, that are built into some of these forms of mediation. And I think for me, a question that I'm always kind of struggling with, um, I think it sort of comes back to some of the readings for this week as well, like this question of the boundary between inner and outer. And I don't even know if this is the right way to think about it. It's always something that I'm struggling with, is whether this boundary between inner and outer is already kind of so built into the current forms of mediation that we're already closing ourselves into a certain way of thinking just by using these terms. But the question about sort of a collective inwardness, I think, is, at least for me, it's like a gesture towards trying to reimagine this boundary in a way that is no longer centered around the notion of an individual subject, and sort of the structure of mediation that would sort of create this strict boundary between sort of an external reality and an inner subjective world. I think for me, this is a question that comes throughout the entire seminar. I hope it's something that we can address together, because it really has to do with this question of sort of the boundary between where the immaterial and the material also kind of lies. And that's another reason why I'm excited to bring Ali next week into the conversation, because part of the what inspired the inward climate writing is actually just some research that I was doing in collaboration with him, around in certain Islamic thought, different ways of conceptualizing a sense of inwardness that is not confined to the individual, but instead it's almost like it's almost like sort of a mystic sense of the deeper that you go inward, the more you sort of enter a collective space beyond the self and beyond the individual, and trying to understand what that could mean sort of in contemporary terms, of kind of reimagining this notion of inwardness beyond individuality. So it kind of gets abstract and mystic, but I also think that there's a lot of also like very tangible ways to think about it as well, that you both have brought up already. So I'm really excited to keep exploring that. But yeah, there's so much to say here. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah.
Ye-
Or if you want to go on.
It's, no, it's not directly related. So,
Well, I was thinking about um, the idea. I mean, you talk about the inwardness of microclimates, and you talk about some kind of specificity of the microclimate and the participation of individuals. But my question is, how do you define these parameters uh, around the constitution of this collective forest inwardness, for example? I'm thinking a lot on Gilbert Simondon, maybe because most of my participation in the new center has been around it because of Cecile Malaspina. But my question is this: the idea of individuation, or how are these parameters that make you conceive or determine what is a microclimate? Yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think this might not be a satisfying answer, and it's something that we can keep exploring, because I do think it's an important question. But I feel like,
There are always the answers are in process. I mean,
yes,
something that like microclimates, maybe.
yes, yes, thank you for that. Definitely. Um, yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something important about sort of the fuzziness of that boundary or like the uncertainty around it. But I know that that might lead to some kind of imprecision, around the concept. Um, but I guess it's the way that I've been thinking about it, and this doesn't have to be how you all think about it, or we can keep talking about it. But a microclimate, in a way, it's sort of like the way that I imagine it, it's like a space where from within the world seems very different from the way it does outside of it. So where that boundary happens, it's very unclear. It's sort of like entering into a dream where where's the threshold between waking and dreaming, but well, the kind you sort of enter into the dream and you're fully into it. Um, and maybe you only realize you were in it once you leave and you're sort of in another space. So I kind of feel like maybe there is a quality of inwardness about that where that boundary even happens. Like it's a threshold that can only really be fully measured, like from kind of a sensory standpoint or perspective, from within. It's a feeling of crossing into another space where the world is no longer the same. And from the outside, it might look totally different. That's just an attempt to
Yeah, but
respond.
it's like a proper approach, I think. I mean, to define it like something that changes the perception and the sensibility, as you said about the goosebumps in rituals in Spain. I think they were in Spain. Weren't they?
In Brazil, that was kind of
Brazil.
from a different
Yeah.
context. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, so I'm interested in this, your almost frustration with this inward outward um, dichotomy. and it reminds me of I mean, you use this Buckmorse term of this synesthetic experience as a positive um, idea whereby I guess it's a mimetic experience. And I have the quote here. Um, it identifies the mimetic synchrony between our outer stimulus, perception, and inner stimulus, body sensations, including sense memories, as the crucial element of aesthetic cognition. And so this is redefining experience as something which is neither internal nor external, but this mirror stage. It kind of reminds me of this, I mean, she's very Adorno inspired, and Adorno writes about Kierkegaard and this idea where the idea and language have a mimetic experience of each other, where when we say cup, we imagine a cup. When we see a cup, we imagine the word cup. But that's already like incredibly internal, and she's trying to get past this by you know, introducing the neuroscience aspect through Bell. But my question is, you're in a way, you're kind of trying to use this synesthetic idea as like a positive idea, but I see it for her in a way as just presenting like the stakes, just how things are, and then how things are, in order to then describe how it has been manipulated by fascism. But what I think is particularly interesting, and in a way, like I find like some of the VR examples problematic, but it's quite interesting because the example she's using with Ernst Jünger, talking about the need to produce the screen and the camera, the artificial image as a shield to protect ourselves from the external world because it's too painful. Um, Using VR as a way to like transcend the viewer user perspective is intensely interesting in that perspective of looking at it from the younger, but then it just becomes also incredibly problematic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying because I always have struggled with this article in a way. I've grappled with it, I guess. And I've also grappled with the whole kind of topic around VR and how all this stuff is interrelated. Um, I think that like you said, synesthetics, I think she does sort of make sort of a natural claim about it that it is, like you said, like just the way that it is, like the condition, like sort of an instinctive state of how organisms relate to their environment that's then kind of like corrupted into this form of self-enclosure through media, kind of a phantasmagoric like shielding from reality. And sort of in a Marxist term, that's what prevents us from realizing the conditions of our own kind of oppression. Um, but but I do think that the terms that she uses, they might just be a little bit too rigid. Like I guess one question I've always had about that article is like it's all very much based in this notion of kind of reality that uh, we're being deceived or being cut off from the real through media or through the phantasmagoria, um, and that sort of the anesthetic is a form of of yeah reducing our capacity to understand and engage with the real, and kind of in like a very literal sense, like you could understand sort of VR as a similar sort of like immersive world that is totally manufactured in a way to immerse us, um, to transport us into different realities at the same time as kind of helping us escape from the conditions of our own lives. Um, so I mean, yeah, I mean, I think these are all issues that aren't just sort of internal to the readings or to the research on VR and that kind of thing, but they're questions that, to me, I guess, just speak to this condition that I feel like many people are in right now of just sort of not knowing, like feeling trapped, I guess, in various ways, feeling trapped by notions of reality, feeling trapped by notions of sort of hypermediation and virtuality, and the commodification of the image, and being torn between these two spaces, just like being torn between sort of an inner individuality and an objective external reality. We're given these two options of kind of the real and the virtual. Um, and I think the article does kind of reinforce that.
Mm.
But I also wonder to what extent sort of the synesthetic, because for Buck Morse, I do think that the synesthetic is for her how how our sensory uh, apparatus, whatever you want to call it, like how it like the way that she describes it is like our sort of instinctive response to our surroundings happens through this synesthetic system. And so I think for her there is sort of a positive connotation to the synesthetic as opposed to the anesthetic. But we don't have to take it that way. It can be overly simplifying to say the synesthetic is good, the anesthetic is bad. Image is illusion and reality is the truth. Like all these dichotomies are things that I think they're just really hard to be so clear about, but they also seem so necessary to kind of grapple with right now. Um, but again, I hope these are questions that we can keep exploring together in this seminar. I don't know if that really answered your question, but feel free to pose it again and bring it back up.
No, I think that's a great answer. I don't want to say too much more, but I think that what you said where it was she gets kind of stuck in this new dichotomy between the real and the virtual, which is almost equally problematic. That was a great point.
But yeah, I mean, also the fact that you're kind of raising this problem, which is like everything does kind of become problematic. Like it's hard not to, it's sort of, yeah, the terms that we're dealing with and the kind of histories that we're dealing with, it's almost impossible not to just kind of fall into one problem or another, but you just have to try to find an approach that allows for certain things to become clear at the expense of others most of the time.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I was just thinking so not about the virtual part of the art like the article most of the times, but the whole idea of aesthetics and anesthetics and how even we as people experience these both concepts at the same time. Like for example, I work in corporate and I work basically as a field worker, um, and I have to go to different places. But then I'm on the other side, I'm also a researcher and a social anthropologist. But when I'm a corporate person, I don't allow my senses to like, you know, experience everything to that level. And maybe it's just because I'm always overwhelmed or overburdened with a lot of multiple intersectional things. But when I'm purely working as a researcher, it's like all my senses have just opened up. I'm thinking about different perspectives. So there is this, how do you say it? Like it's very contradictory for the same person to feel two different things at like I don't know if that makes sense to the whole topic of microclimates, but this is all I could think about. Like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I completely agree that to say that there's this one thing called synesthetics and one thing called anesthetics and they're totally separate doesn't seem to ring true. There's always this mixture and for the same person in different spaces and different moments, you can have both of them. And I think this is something that Ali can speak to next week too, is sort of maybe there's some value to kind of escapism and to kind of some kind of shelter. And in a way that Buck Morse might consider it anesthetic, but it's necessary for survival in today's world, and also potentially a space that's almost like a nursery for a new kind of perception to emerge. Um, so yeah, I'm really happy that you brought up this point about that it's never clear cut one or the other, and there might not be, only one way is the right way. There might be different combinations that are useful in different kinds of situations.
And maybe one more thing I also noticed is that because I'm that privileged, I can at least experience both of these boundaries together. They're like this, whenever this class difference steps in, like Marx just described it in the article as well. Like Marx was quoted in it, basically the idea that uh, workers are so engaged in that same monotonous work that they never get to experience the whole aesthetic part of it because nothing might really look or sound aesthetic.
Yeah.
I'm just like kind of wondering if like it's even possible to recognize an anesthetic, because I mean, if you're so I feel like I've spent a good part of my life in one echo chamber, which was with art and academy, and then I spent like a good 2 to 3 years uh closer, I would say, to like a rural working class and with a lot of conversation with what I like this division of dividing the bourgeois into like the Brahmin left and the mercantile right. And in that definition with the mercantile right, so in this sort of space, like the discourse is very different from what we are used to over here. And I'm trying to like think through a particular history of tragedy, a particular crisis that happened in the 50s and its impact in the future. And as I'm trying, it's a very simple story, but now I'm kind of like adding layers. I'm putting Freud into the mix. I'm kind of going into Bataille. I'm trying to think about the sublime. And I've gone through the entire canon of Western, like post-Enlightenment theory in order to understand it fairly simple. And the question is, the contemplation over here, is this bringing us closer? Is the contemplation anesthetic? That is a question that kind of like keeps popping up. So I feel like in the sort of like space that we are kind of like conversing in, we take for granted that there is contemplation is in itself aesthetic, right? So as opposed to something that kind of like numbs you from thinking. But if you're looking at what aesthetic, the definition that Buck Morse kind of like brings to the table, like, yeah, that's kind of it.
Yeah, I totally agree because I mean, this is something that I'm starting to wonder if maybe Buck Morse, the way that it's framed in this article is like a little bit too clear cut. And I think that's what everyone's kind of raising is like I've read this article before and it's kind of made me feel like shit about my own practice, and I'm like maybe I'm just creating sort of an aesthetic phantasmagorias for myself, or for the people around me, that are actually like counterproductive to what I'm trying to do. And I think this is probably, well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like anyone who works kind of creatively probably wonders a similar thing. It's like often it feels like a very privileged thing to be able to take time to contemplate and to create and have ideas. And um, this kind of framing of things can bring that out, I think, and raise this question in uncomfortable ways. And I think it's an important thing to grapple with. But I also feel like it's important not to just see not to just see it as always a negative. Like I think this is, what multiple people have brought up now is like sometimes the anesthetic spaces can actually be productive and be generative and are necessary. And they aren't something to be constantly, uh, I mean, you can constantly doubt them and constantly question them, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I totally see your point about the ambivalence kind of contemplation. At least I think if that's how I'm interpreting your comment correctly, that, there's always this sense that maybe it is sort of like a sheltering that happens in thought. And again, this brings us back to the question of kind of inner and outer and this kind of inwardness. Yeah, this is a tension that runs throughout everything in this seminar, I think. And I don't have the answer.
I have a thought, just listening to you guys speak, that anesthetic has some quality of the ritual, for you to know where is the boundary. Like indigenous tribes, they have these rituals when you're passing through adolescence to adulthood. And you could see as this ritual as an aesthetic kind of thing, but it's actually to delimitate where is the boundary and what you're crossing and which space you're coming from and which space you're going. I don't know if it makes sense.
Definitely. I think like the liminal space might be what you're talking about. Just thinking in anthropology, like discussing kind of rites of passage and transitioning from one state to another in like a social environment. And there's this kind of crossing over that happens of a social boundary that for a lot of philosophers and artists has been like a very inspiring notion, this kind of space of the uncertain sort of in between. And I think, yeah, the word liminal is kind of at this boundary. I mean, it also brings up, I don't know if anyone really caught it, but in the first reading that I read, Climate of Spectacle, I sort of raised this concept of like presence as being there and not there. And I think this kind of speaks to a lot of what what everyone's saying is this simultaneous experience of both being present but also being sort of projected into some other kind of space uh, simultaneously, which I think kind of crosses between this boundary of synesthetic and anesthetic as well. I mean, another thing is like there are so many spaces now that we exist in, like this space that we're currently in this seminar. I think you can understand that as sort of a liminal space, or an experience of being there and not there. Like I'm here, in this room with my plants, but also I'm in this in between space with all of you, and we're all kind of experiencing this together. I'm sure that everyone's thought about this and talked about it a lot over the past years. But it still doesn't, I haven't fully understood it, like what this space really is. Um, and we're always kind of moving through spaces like this kind of imagistic in between space where our presence is completely sort of multiple. Anyone else want to bring up anything totally unrelated, whatever, any responses or questions?
I just had a quick question is it Jones John? You were talking about the contemplation as an anesthetic in itself, and I'm just curious, do you mean contemplation as in like where we are now discussing as a sort of a privileged group of people in the academic sphere, or can it be contemplation like meditation or what do you define as like the contemplative, I guess? I'm curious.
I think like contemplation as like maybe academically mediated.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, yeah, like meditation, I feel like would be in the realm, I mean, of like pure aesthetic, again, using the same
Yeah.
definition, like this feeling oneself, like the inner world, right? But I'm wondering, like, when we kind of like think through experiences through levels of mediation, layers
Yeah.
of mediation.
It's like an analyzation that's detached from the actual experience in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And just to add to the conversation, I guess I feel like I recently saw a documentary. I didn't actually finish it, but it was called All That Breathes. I don't know if anyone else has seen it. But anyway, it's very interesting, and it's about I'm forgetting exactly where it takes place right now, but it's these forgive me, maybe I think it's in India, but I don't actually know what city because I didn't
Is
finish
it
the
about
film
the
and I don't
birds?
remember. But what's that?
Is it about the birds?
Yes.
It's in Delhi.
Okay.
It,
So yeah, so the two brothers, or not brothers, two friends taking care of these kite birds, and it's very poetic and very beautiful. The documentary, like nothing I've ever actually seen, but um, it's just showing this, intense city life with their attempt to sort of, and also their experience of nature within the city, which is very like pure and beautiful, and then how they're trying to help these kite birds and repair their wings and kind of yeah, I don't know. It's just a very interesting intersection of these different worlds coming together and kind of making you feel as a person that like we're in this natural world, but everything we've created around us is sort of killing the natural world and us, and it's just an interesting contradiction that I think is relevant to the different like readings and the things we're talking about, and yeah, I don't know.
Can I ask something? Hi, I'm Shula. So I was kind of wondering that if we are to have a goal, would that goal be to not be anesthetized? Sorry for the pronunciation. That's a terrible word for me as a Spanish speaker. But or is it to be like as in Matrix, where like you should be out of the Matrix and realize everything that's in front of you is a lie and take up on arms and yada yada. But or would it be like to like it's okay to fall into anesthetics sometimes, but you need to have the tools to snap out of it again, if that makes sense, That's if we are to have a goal. I mean, I know we are only discussing, but just to, I don't know, that was something that I started wondering a couple of minutes ago.
I I feel like if we're talking about the Buck Morse article, then yeah, that is a clear negative and anesthetize. I mean, besides, she does say that it's of course useful for dental surgery, for example, to be anesthetized. So that's probably correct. But yeah, I feel like I agree. I totally agree with Will that I feel like that's the major weakness is it sort of juxtaposes like it comes into this matrix type distinction between experiencing everything and being anesthetized. But I don't think she intends that because this idea of synesthesia is already like permitting for mediated experience, because it's this idea where the external world is mirrored. It's a mimetic experience where the external world is like mirrored in our mind. So I think that she is acknowledging that everything is mediated. And so things like, you know, screen technologies and things like that aren't necessarily anesthetizing. And so, of course, you know, I think if she's encouraging Benjamin is not saying we shouldn't use technology because that's reactionary and fascist. But I think that it's a bit reductive. But ultimately, like, I don't know. I do think, you know, I thought it was really fascinating on a purely historical level, the information she gave about like working class using opiates as childcare in the 19th century, and just how the documentation of how widespread that kind of stuff was. And on that level, it is just shocking the kind of need to um, anesthetize oneself from the horrors of modernization in that in those examples. But I don't think that it is kind of like saying that all interaction with technology is anesthetizing. I don't think it's saying that in any way.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I mean, I also like that you brought up the Matrix, because I do think that's a great example. It's sort of like this myth that's underlying like a lot of, I think, thoughts about these topics. And I just kind of feel like, yeah, like everyone's kind of already brought up, is this is not, it's not a good enough myth. Like it doesn't, we need like a new way to think about these questions. That's not just like, being plugged into the matrix or like escaping the matrix into reality. There just has to be another way to think about some of these questions. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it, or to start thinking about what that could look like. Any other questions, or we can come back later and have more discussion about the readings, or anything really. But at some point we should do the introductions and then talk about some logistics, and then also take a break at some point. What's everyone feeling? I mean, we can keep talking for a little bit longer and then switch to introductions, or does anyone have any thoughts they want to share at this point before we kind of move on?
I have like not sure if it's like completely related, but so I'm studying like design, and basically my degree like they changes the program every time a new technology enters the design space. So currently like a lot of the projects that my senior thesis people are doing is like very immersive, projection mapping, sound, taste, immersing all of the senses. And when I was listening to you, it was feels kind of like they were like all kind of trying to construct these like microclimates to like all like trying to get attention from people at all times. And whenever I go to like a contemporary art space in Bangkok, which is where I'm from, it's all these like very immersive video art, immersive experience, immersive dining experience. It's like it's almost impossible to escape any of this now. And even if you go to like a vacation or something, it's still like a constructed experience. Yeah, so it feels like this is what I'm like studying towards. They're trying to have me like catch as much attention as possible through all these senses, and it's like, you know, yeah. So,
If I may just to add on to that, I think that's fascinating because that's like a contemporary trend. Yeah, to just like to stimulate all your senses. And part of my research is looking at different curatorial approaches. And part of that is like doing visitor engagement, like surveys or qualitative research. And I've heard, well, what I've gleaned from the research is that it feels like kind of like an assault on their senses. Like some people are like really sensitive to sound, but yet they can't escape it because it just infiltrates like the entire like gallery space, light as well. And that like there's actually like I've never tried this and I've actually never experienced it either in a gallery space, but like sense as well. Some people are like highly sensitive to sense, but like I think this is a trend to also push back like the containment and also to like the containment of particular artworks so that everyone experiences it no matter where you are, but also the containing of it helps people like negotiate whether they want to experience it or not. Um, like in the sense of sense, there is a show in a city nearby that they hired like a local perfumist to create signature scents inspired by a particular painting, and they have it like under what are those called? Like the restaurant things, you know what I'm talking about, like those little domes. And then like people can like pick it up and experience the scent and the painting at the same time, but like you get to choose rather than like having to walk through a noisy space or a really yeah, a space with a lot of smell scent. So I don't know how this all relates. There is a relationship, I haven't like made it yet with like everything we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about sort of like overstimulation and kind of like choice, I guess, because the way that sometimes maybe or the way that like it could be framed is sort of like the image is kind of like the shelter from like the harsh reality, but the images are so overwhelming sometimes too, like the bombardment of media and on all the senses. And I mean, it's an interesting trend because it raises the question of like, is it is it a trend because people sort of like desire these kinds of multisensory spaces of immersion for whatever reason? Like it's something that's lacking in other parts of their life, or maybe it's something that they're more familiar with, or they want to kind of escape into this immersive space, or is it more of kind of a trend that is being imposed sort of, from within the art world? It's very interesting.
And if I can shoot in, I think that was a great point. And this is where I really do like the term synesthetics, because that implies a kind of crossover between individual senses. And if you're always having these exhibition spaces and designs where you have a sensory overload all the time and multiple sensory inputs, you can't allow the evocation of one sense from the other. I'm a musician, but I work with visual images all the time, but often it's much more um, successful if you just hint at something with a sound or allude to something. And if you have like visuals constantly, as is now becoming the norm in music as well, then you kind of lose this evocative power. Um, I mean, if you use the simple example of like hearing a car past the house, you immediately can see a car. And it's the same with smell and all of the senses. And that's where I like that term because it implies this kind of mimesis, not just between external and internal, but between all the different senses. And that's really beautiful. And I think that's what you're getting at as well. I thought that was a great point.
Also to add on to that, to Gio's and John's point, I just recently saw the Nan Golden exhibition at the Grand Palais, which I was at the opening and it should have been really nice, and it was, but there were a lot of people crammed into these little rooms of each little space she set up for each of her photo series. But there were no photos shown at all. They were just slideshows of her old work put to music. And it was really strange to go into an exhibition about photography with no photos at all. So I guess to go back to the point of like why people are doing this, I think it's about like money, and also like people want that full immersive experience. But also it's, I guess for me, I felt like, oh, they're repeating photos. the rooms are really hot. They felt kind of lazily put together as a series. And also just the original, like Benjamin talked about, the aura of the actual piece of artwork is really further removed through putting it in the slideshow format. There's no longer any photograph. It's just like a reel on Instagram or something like that we could just see at home. So it just felt a bit strange to be in that space. So just back to the art point of all of that.
Yeah, as I was reading the Buckmorse article again, I thought about like scrolling and like sort of the experience of scrolling and sort of just getting, it's almost like having an out-of-body experience in a way when you're scrolling, and also kind of just like a total loss of like memory and like other kinds of, it's like this very kind of, and I'm not saying that it's like necessarily bad or evil or anything like that, but it resonated, I think, with what Buck Morse was describing, where there's and this I think ties to sort of what you're talking about in that gallery space of kind of like um in a weird way, even with this attention to the immersive, there's also kind of like a little bit of a loss of attention to like the environmental spaces, because the image is kind of consuming in a way, or it kind of projects you into this other space, or this other kind of state of mind and body. Um, and the kind of loss of memory, or the loss of kind of like a cohesive movement through time or something like that, that comes from just like rapidly seeing one image after another, or kind of entering this space where all the images are happening simultaneously, like maybe the slideshow is kind of evoking in a way. Just sort of a different experience of time, I guess, and memory in relation to these technologies as well. That sort of leads to this weird kind of tension, I guess, with the physical space, but also this kind of projection, like almost out of body into this image world that just, it's not even that immersive, but if it's on your phone, like, I don't know, it's sort of like, taking the subway, and everyone's kind of immersed in those spaces as well. Um, the kind of anesthetic qualities of that are just part of everyday life, for a lot of people. But yeah, also that makes me think of music, because like, I mean, anyone who's a musician can probably answer this or respond to this better if you feel like it, but like, where is the space of music? I feel like when I listen to music, like I'm transported into a different space almost sometimes. And it's a space that feels like it, especially like in a live music setting, like it's shared. It's like a shared kind of sensory space. Other times, if I'm listening to music while I'm walking around or something, I can feel very immersed in the physical surroundings through the music more than when I'm just not listening. So all these kind of strange sort of sensory and media phenomena that are just so much part of many of our lives now, I think. We kind of move through these different spaces all the time.
It's a little bit of the fascism of the senses. I think we are so overstimulated by so many things at the same time, like these immersion experiences, that we actually never get to identify or to find ourselves inside of the experience. I think it pushes you to an almost schizophrenia of reality, to be so overwhelmed all the time, even when you're trying to escape. I think it's what at least Benjamin was talking about, the fascism of it all.
There is a very interesting PhD by a Canadian artist and musician called Tim Hecker, that writes about the dogmatic qualities of sound. It's really interesting because he makes a kind of like crossover between kind of like the power of sound, like basically like in terms of volume, and how Nazi Germany started to really engineer like the actual powers of like the just engineer like how they could basically portray more volume onto the crowds, and then makes a very interesting crossover also with more like churches and ecclesiastic experiences as well within sound. And just also, yeah, just when India was mentioning about this, kind of like wanted to point out. Yeah, like I will share in the chat the reference if anyone wants.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, and everyone can just share anything that you want to reference in the chat as well. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, bringing up sort of like the religious aspect of it as well. I feel like I don't fully have like the bandwidth to unpack that right now, but there's an interesting point that's made around this. I guess in regard to sort of like the way that in the contemporary world, like it's sort of at least like kind of in like a materialist culture, secular materialist culture, kind of the image has a strange status, like things like music or sound or image, because they are, in a way, they're kind of, they don't fully fit into a materialist paradigm, clearly. They have this sort of immaterial quality. It's hard to say exactly like what they are, and they have this strange kind of status in relation to the real as well because of that. They're not quite material, they're not quite real, but they're so kind of present. They're so kind of like tangible and such a big part of so many of our everyday lives. And raising the question of whether, like, without saying that they're inherently religious, but perhaps like there are sort of religious concepts around the immaterial because they are sort of excluded in a way from a materialist understanding of the real. Maybe there are sort of concepts coming from religious spaces that are more equipped to describe some of these seemingly kind of immaterial phenomena, um, like the experience of being in a religious space with the sound and that kind of thing. I don't know if that was really the direction that you were going with it. There might be a totally different direction to take that thought. But it did kind of it raised it for me because like next week we'll be talking about different kinds of Islamic concepts around presence and its relation potentially to kind of virtual spaces. So I just think it's intriguing to consider like how, without saying that something like the virtual is inherently religious, perhaps there are concepts that come from kind of religious traditions that are actually more equipped to understand them and explain them than the concepts prevalent in kind of more materialistic and secular traditions. Anything else anyone wants to share at this point? Or any questions?
Hi, I'm Bianca. I was thinking a bit about what you said about this collective experience when you listen to music and everything, and what it means to have like this collective overstimulation of the senses somehow, and also like how compared to like an individual thing, like we had the real or like the media thing, and then there's I think it is like a different moment, and also like this goosebump thing that you talked about in your text is something I would connect more to this like collective moment of being in a crowd and having this feeling of like, yeah, overstimulation in a sense, but also then I had to immediately think about like the fascist speeches, like with like the where you have this too in like a very like bad sense. But I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think it's something I'm interested in like thinking more about in the future.
Yes, definitely. And I do think that, it's important to be like when we're reading Buck Morse or something, like she does use like very extreme example, of fascism, and she's addressing that like head on. But I don't think that we don't have to use that same kind of like extreme sort of terminology or political kind of standpoint. We can explore these ideas, I think, without fearing that we're gonna like somehow like represent fascism like in a positive light, I think, by talking about them. But I do think it's an important thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I just also kind of feel like, yeah, we can think through these ideas and see where they lead. Um, and while being cautious. But yeah, I definitely want to think through it with you as well.
I have a thought, like a loose thought, thinking about kind of the conversation of overstimulation and choice. Because I was also thinking, oh, well, okay. I guess a bit of context is there's a movie called Daughters of the Dust that is like it's a Southern magical realism movie, and it examines the life of a family belonging to the Gulagish culture. And so the Gulagish culture, I don't know if anyone's familiar, but it's a culture that was based in like the islands of South Carolina, United States, and based on like the very quick history, it was an island that ended up being residing slaves, enslaved people, Africans that came over because I don't remember one way or another, were able to get onto the islands and then produce their own culture. And so it was really interesting because I'm not too familiar with the Gulagish culture, and I was watching this movie, and it really opened up a lens of like this culture outside of the culture of Blackness outside of an enslaved America. And it was really interesting witnessing like in the movie follows this family through a day and a half of where they're all about to leave. I think it's 1902. They're all about to leave and head up north to United States. And it was really and a lot of the movie was about this working of faith and the continually questioning of faith, and specifically the practices of hoodoo and voodoo, in contrast to Christianity, which is being pushed in the United States. And now we were talking about kind of like this collective understanding, or like maybe there's some religious notion or being that exists that's able to help us like kind of comprehend overstimulation, or well, these are two diverging thoughts that help us sort of like be able to navigate the conversation of, I'm forgetting exactly, I kind of lost myself in what I'm saying, but hopping over to my other point of thinking about living in a time outside of this like structure that we think is so completely unavoidable, and how that ties back into religion and nature and society and culture. I'm kind of losing myself, and maybe I just want to talk about Daughters of the Dust. It's such a good movie, but it's interesting kind of that conversation in this movie, what it was presenting, because also in the movie it's really long. It's about 2 hour movie, and you go through these intense emotional scenes that you have to sit through. There's no cutting, there's no transition. Like you are sitting through a confrontation, emotional, faithful confrontation from beginning to end. And sometimes you get a resolution, sometimes you don't. And then it will gently and nicely transition into like this synthy music video that goes into you witnessing the ancestral knowledge that this family works, and the dyeing of indigo and the practicing of hoodoo. It's really like amazing. And it's free on YouTube. I'll put a link. And it's great. I cried a few times, but I think maybe like, I don't know, how could we examine, I don't know, just that was, I don't know, it's a good movie for maybe like understanding nature and religion, and working outside of systems that feel impossible to break. And also like as a Black American, it had me really thinking with this family that lived in this magical realism territory that was free of grief and fully one with nature. And something that I am not familiar with, knowing that my ancestors were enslaved and how I had to get here, it really opened my imagination to a historical possibility I didn't think was capable. And it also really excites me in the way of like what lessons can be learned or from extractor, maybe not even lessons, but like what is something that made that tangible or possible. And maybe that boundary alone is just like creating it yourself. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I don't know. I'll put the link in the description, but that's everything I was just thinking about right now.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely share that. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a beautiful example because not only is it sort of like the Gulagish culture is kind of like can help us sort of navigate contemporary issues, but also like that film allows viewers to kind of enter that space of like that world, which I think shows the potential for something like, the image and sort of like contemporary media environment to open into other kinds of worlds. Um,
If I may, and just even talking about like the image itself, Arthur Jaffa was a cinematographer and he had to create special film with, I think, Fujifilm in order to register like the skin, the phenotype of the Gullah Geesh people. So I mean, like he revolutionized film as well and like expanded the field of representation. So I think I don't know how that contributes to this conversation, but I think in terms of like possibility, I think there was he opened up a lot of space too.
all right, any more questions or thoughts or anything? I feel like maybe we should take a break and then come back and do introductions, because it'd just be amazing to hear from everyone now that we've been able to talk for a little while already. Does anyone want to share anything more before we just take a break? Okay. Then feel free to like throw something in the chat or whatever you're thinking in the meantime, but let's just take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we can do introductions and talk about logistics and hopefully like have a little bit more discussion too before the end. But yeah, see you in about 5 minutes. Okay, so just to cover some logistics, let me look at my notes. So we have 4 meetings. And for the second and third meeting, I think it would be really interesting if everyone could just, for one of those sessions, bring an example of a microclimate, whatever that means to you. Just bring an example of a microclimate and share it with us. And it doesn't have to be like a long presentation or anything. Actually, it'd be better if it's not a long presentation, like just a couple minutes if you want to introduce it, and then leave some space for everyone to respond. But I think this can be really interesting. Like, what is a microclimate? What are we even talking about? You can just see what you find and what you want to share. So that is like one of the required parts of the seminars, for either next week or the following week. Just bring an example of a microclimate to share, and we can discuss it as a group. If you want to, you can also, if you feel like collaborating with someone else from the seminar on this, feel free. I think it would be great if you do notice that you have like affinities with other participants in the seminar. You can feel free to work together on that. But yeah, we'll save some time in the next session for hopefully like around half. I'm not gonna, divide everyone up and say you have to do it this day or this day, but it would be great if you feel inspired to just try to bring it next week so that we don't have all of them on the third session. But yeah, I think it'll be fun to see what everyone brings. Any questions about that? Let me know if you have any questions so you can reach me over email. Hopefully everyone has my email. And then for the final week, so the final session, week 4, It's pretty much going to be completely dedicated to works in progress, like presentations, so that all of you can just share what you're working on. Again, this is kind of like intentionally open-ended. If you want more structure or guidance, like just let me know and I'm free. I mean, feel free to do that. I'm happy to work with you on it. But the idea is just like, share your own exploration of microclimates in this seminar, and share some kind of work in progress in that final session. And hopefully it's kind of like a new work in progress that's inspired by the seminar. But it can include other things that you're working on. And then that will be the final project. And I'm still working out exactly when like the due date is for that. But hopefully it'll be due like about a month after the last seminar. But it just depends on what the new center will allow. But let me know if you have any questions about that. It's sort of just, like I said, like an exploration of microclimates. It could be analytic, it could be creative, it could be both, it could be neither. It could be in any medium that you want. But the point is that in the fourth week, you just share it with us, like brief presentation so that everyone can go. So just a few minutes and then you can get feedback from the group. But yeah, any questions about that? Okay.
I do have a quick question for the final project. As far as if it's, for example, a written piece, is there some sort of word count or kind of expectation of what you are looking for? Or
No.
okay.
I mean, I think it's really just, for your benefit, what you want to share, what you want to do, and what you're able to. I realize that everyone has a lot going on, and it's really amazing that you're able to be here for this. So just, do with it what you want, what's going to be helpful for you. And then I'll give you final feedback like when you turn it in at the end. Any other questions? All right. So I think that's it in terms of like the seminar logistics. But I can give a couple of notes about next session. So for next week, we are going to be joined by a guest, Ali Islami. So he's going to be discussing his work, Eshraq, which is this ongoing sort of virtual world that he's working on in multiple media. So in the meantime, over this week, I'm going to share a short film I think it's about 10 or 20 minutes, that you can watch in addition to the readings. One of the readings is just a link to kind of like his blog. Yeah, go ahead. Any question? Was that a question? Okay. But I think it would be really great. I mean, I know that Ali, I think he's going to be really curious to hear what your thoughts are about his work, like whatever your sort of intuitive response is. Because the work is about sort of like presence, concepts of presence, experiences of presence, which involves sort of like a sort of non-discursive, like experiential kind of, or like immediacy kind of quality. So I think he'll be curious to just hear what your responses are before he goes into some explanation of what he's doing. So if you could just please like come prepared with some thoughts or some reactions. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, just some brief questions or reactions or thoughts or anything that was kind of inspired by his work. I think he would really appreciate it. And then we can go into his presentation and discussion from there. But I will send a link for that. I will send a link for that video. It's not a public link, so please just don't share it. It's just for us. But I think that's it. Let's see. Okay, great. And Thank you. It sounds like we can go ahead with introductions. Was there a question about the essay? Let's see, any other questions or anything before we do introductions?
Hold on, just sorry to go back to the essay question. That just made me like unsure. The mention of an essay that you said it was a medium of our choice.
Yeah, there's no essay.
Okay.
There's no
So
essay required.
we'll present, and then do we just send you our presentations as well?
Yeah,
Or something like that?
you can, well, yeah, I guess depending on the medium, it's maybe hard to distinguish like the presentation from the final. Well, here's the thing is like the final session where we'll be presenting to each other, you only have like a couple minutes to present a work in progress and kind of like, describe it to us or whatever you want to do to contextualize it so that we can give feedback. Then the final project, whatever that is, you can just send it to me like, a month or so, a few weeks or a month after. And then I can give you feedback on that. But yeah, it doesn't have to be an essay. It could be an essay. It's totally up to you. But that should be it in terms of the requirements for the course. Okay. And yeah, thanks a lot for checking about the introductions. So it sounds like we can go ahead with that. So yeah, if anyone just wants to go ahead and introduce yourself like briefly, whatever you want to share. I mean, I feel like it's better if, it just happens. But if we have to find a structure for it, but I also don't want to call people out and be like, you have to introduce yourself. So just whatever you're comfortable with. But I just think it would be great if, yeah, if we can just introduce ourselves. We already had an amazing conversation, so there's no need to be shy.
I can just go. I'm
Thanks.
Olivia. Just as a background, I guess I have a background in photography and then also art history. I'm based in Paris since 2020. And yeah, I don't know what else to share about myself. I'm in the curatorial program at the new center. I started in 2023, I think, and I'm restarting because I wasn't able to keep doing it with a full-time job in this time in Paris. But anyway, happy to be here. And I originally didn't sign up for the class because I thought it was really about ecology, and I was like, I can't even start to understand that. And then I realized it was really, yeah, more kind of metaphoric and poetic. And so, yeah, it sounds very interesting and also very relevant to the curatorial framework. So, yeah, don't hesitate if anyone's ever in Paris. We can have a coffee. That's all.
So, my name is Jones, and just like Olivia, I started in 23, and I'm restarting again. I've got a background in curatorial practice. At least I've done some curatorial practice. I have a background in art history. I spent the last 2 years, what do you say, making coffee, like working with smallholder farmers and kind of like doing some specialty processing. But also, I've always kept getting dug back into working on, what do you say? I don't know, like, so basically, like, I think I've always gotten pushed to like either historical, anthropological research. Like, so I'm was based in this hill station in southern India. And so while I was there, rather, I think I just kept getting pulled into like exploring the histories of settler colonialism in the area, thinking about the a particular flood that happened that instigated a migration, the way that the landscape was occupied. So for me, my interest in this was primarily because of the idea of the possibility of it being ecological. But I've always also maintained a writing practice, and I felt like this would be enriching regardless.
I can go next. So I'm Julia. I'm from Argentina, and I'm an industrial designer, but I've been working as a UX designer for the past, I don't know, 6 years. And I was starting losing like hope for design, or at least virtual design, up until I found out about speculative design and futures thinking. So now I'm trying to shift my career towards like that path. And I got into the history design and world making program last year. Now it changed its name. But I'm super happy because I'm meeting like a lot of people that I could have never crossed paths in any other way, I think, and also reading a lot of stuff that was like out of my reach. And yeah, I physically feel my brain getting larger and larger, and that's fun. And I enjoy it. Yeah, I enjoy a lot these sessions and talking to you. And Olivia, I'll be in Paris next month, so I'll ping you later. It would be nice to meet someone. Well, that's me.
Okay, can I go next? I'm Rodolfo. I'm from Mexico, and I'm a visual artist. I'm already like a researcher or something. I mean, I just finished my I have this certificate student in the new center already. But I was really um, like excited about this seminar because I work sometimes with microclimates in a specific way. I'm interested in some archaeological devices made by indigenous people in Mexico who who made microclimates, and they didn't make these spaces for humans, but for the entities of the world. So that's something that, shocked me, and then I work with that, and sometimes I also work with the idea of um, how images are produced by
I think we just lost Rudolfo.
Rudolph.
He'll be back, hopefully.
Okay. Maybe I'll go. But I'll prepare to be interrupted. Hi. My name's John Andrew. I'm joining from Oslo in Norway. I am a musician and a composer, and I'm doing a PhD at the Norwegian Academy right now. And I'm doing a lot of site-specific music and landscape-specific music. And a lot of what I'm doing is also engaging in what is often called interspecies music. I make music with fish. I'm like recording and doing live interactions with fish underwater in the Arctic. But this is actually interesting because a lot of the topics I'm working with are biosemiotics and looking at microclimates, I guess, to use that term, ecosystems and these things as semiotic ecosystems, as well as purely physical ecosystems, because animals are also participating in these semiotic networks. I really like this Yuri Lotman idea, the semiosphere. But yeah, I play the double bass, and it's my first new center class. So this is cool. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, I would go next. I'm Bianca. I'm based in Hamburg in Germany, and I'm studying here for my master's in fine arts and particularly in time-based media. And I'm also doing history in the Classic University here in Hamburg. So that's my background, I would say. And for me, I also saw the seminar title, and I had yeah, I have no idea what microclimates are in a biological way, but I had a lot of associations in my head, and yeah, I'm still thinking a lot after this session, and it's quite hard to grasp for me still. But I'm looking forward to go into this, and also for next week to hear some examples. And yeah, it's my first news center seminar as well. I just started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sojin, and I live in Vancouver, Canada right now, but I'm spiritually based in Berlin. I'm an artist and I make videos and performances. I cannot turn my camera on because I'm still in my PJ. But first, thank you, Will, for the wonderful introduction. I'm taking this seminar because the theme is related to my interests. I'm interested in angels because I think I've definitely encountered one, but nobody believes me. They think I'm tripping, but I'm pretty sure I have. So I want to sort of prove that angels do indeed exist through scientific, technological, and theoretical backings or evidences. So, yeah, that's the reason I'm taking the course, and I'm convinced that Will himself has encountered one. So, I'm here to investigate. My intuitive understanding of an angel is a psychological one. With a hint of religion. So yeah, I'm not really familiar with the term microclimates, but I think it's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
I can I go next? Uh, yeah, I'm really sound. I hope you can hear me because I have really terrible Wi-Fi today. But yes, professionally, I'm a public health consultant. But yes, apart from that, I am a social anthropologist as well. This is my first seminar in the new center too. And yeah, I went through the website and I found that the topic on microclimates was really interesting and the readings were really intriguing. So I just thought about checking it out. Yeah, I'm looking forward to learn more about the whole concept in detail. Thank you.
I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Shakori Carpenter. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, but I'm from North Carolina, United States. I took this course, well, I guess a bit about myself. I teach kids, middle school kids art, and that's fun. My background's in architecture, so that's interesting. And I took this course mainly because I remember looking at the photo and I was like, I couldn't figure out at first if like that was real or a render. Also, it's really loud right now. Sorry if you can hear all that. So, and then I just like was reading words. Some of them I could comprehend, some of them I couldn't. But there were a lot of them that I thought was really interesting. So I just thought I would explore more. Um, yeah, besides my work, I also have a collective, or I'm a part of a collective, Winterfat Collective Press Poetry, and there's another word there I'm forgetting, Feminist Poetry Collective that I'm a part of here as the magazine editor. And I'm also just kind of going in on my own, just like stepping out on complete faith as we're talking about spirituality on one of my own projects that is like this financial philosophy turned just practice of a magazine, also another magazine. So maybe I'll hear about that. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing. Thank you.
I'd love to go next because I think it ties really well. I'm actually currently based in North Carolina, and I'm studying to be an architect. So I think you might relate in a lot of ways. But my name is Yulia. I'm based in the US, but I'm from Siberia originally. And yeah, I'm studying architecture. I'm working on my thesis about urban spaces and their autopoetics and how spaces make their own copies. So I think this seminar could be relevant in a lot of ways in thinking about space on a different scale. Yeah, and it's also my first new standard class. So
I can go next. My name, can you hear me? My name is Melissa. I'm in Medellin, Colombia. I run a cultural space and bookshop in Medellin, where we do book clubs and collective writing groups and mute concerts, and there's all this stuff going on in this old, almost like a clay house where there's like a lot of life, you know. Medellin is a very green city, and in our little front, like 1 meter long strip, we cultivate bananas, plantains, papaya. In the yard, we have um, like a huge vine of passion fruit, and it falls over the wall, and then the neighbors grab them, and I don't know. I also have like a fake persona with a good friend, and we write together and we publish zines together, and I don't know. I just thought this could be an interesting place to be. Thank you.
My name is Gia Del Pino. I'm based out of Tucson, Arizona, United States. I'm currently in a PhD program for art and visual culture education. And I also work at our local arts agency doing kind of grants administration. I'm interested in this course because some of the conceptual questions for a show that I'm doing for my dissertation deal with like hyper-local communities. And I mean, I think there's like some overlap as to consider it as its own microclimate, specifically like political microclimates too, like how are politics being co-created and created in real time, while also like bringing in traditions from the past and like various traditions as well. So yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
I can go next. Hi, my name is Carlos. I'm an artist and I also work for university. I recently moved back to Spain, where I'm originally from. I'm originally from Mallorca, and I really resonated with your first text with him, like the text about Barcelona. I actually wanted to ask you as well if you don't mind sharing it after, since I believe that there are very like a lot of references or crossovers between my research and practice. I'm yeah, just very interested in, I would say, the summary like rebranding of Spain from the 60s, like late modernism and so on, to the current state of Spain, touching upon the massification of tourism and many other aspects. And what like reason why I chose this seminar was first because of the, I think, picture that you had from this Pierre Rouge, yeah, like artwork, and then just like very curious about the notion of microclimates in general, like just to, even this seminar already I learned or got super inspired by some of all of your thoughts. So yeah, happy to be here.
I can go next. I'm Nune, and I'm from Bangkok. I'm currently in my going into my second year of like design school, bachelor's degree, and I just wanted to have like a more like also like a theoretical background to my studies because in design school it's very like hands-on. I feel like I'm losing that academic side of myself. Yeah, and the reason I wanted to join a seminar is because I'm very interested in like experiences and also how we understand and form knowledge through our experiences. So I thought this was an interesting side of it.
So hi everyone. So I can go next. My name is Amin. I have a Master of Fine Art in Film and Media Arts, and I am currently researching and writing. I think this seminar will be helpful for me in terms of learning about phenomenology of perception and its relation to multisensory and post-sensory aesthetics that I'm actually researching and writing kind of essay about that. I hope I can share some parts of it like in the current in the future sessions. Thank you.
I can jump in. I'm Marta. I'm from Barcelona. So your first reading was very visual for me. And my background is in marine ecology. I did my PhD on marine microbiology with water samples from the global ocean. So my goal was to understand how these marine bacteria help regulate climate worldwide through their metabolism. And I kept my postdocs on this topic, but the more I got into academia, the less attached I felt to it, scientific academia. And I started a self-taught artistic career through the digital arts, speaking like parting from scientific topics within this climate crisis context, in order to like give new meanings to scientific concepts from the arts and other disciplines. Actually, that's one of the reasons I enrolled this seminar, because I love like finding these ecological terms and see how they can be understood and felt through other disciplines. And yeah, that's myself. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, my name is Leonardo Merard. I'm based in Mexico City and I'm a student of sociology. I'm about to get my bachelor degree, and my thesis is about um, a special social production of the rave scene within the city. And my background is in music production and interior design. Um, but I got into this seminar because I have like a very deep relation with a space within the city. It's called a sculptural space. It's inside um, the university city of UNAM. And I felt like the purpose, the will, the energy that the creators of that space put in that place is I can feel it, and it always take me to like just like a liminal experience, because I feel like I'm there, but I also feel like I can dream whatever I want. So that feeling is, I feel I'm like it's very cultivating for me. So I thought like maybe studying from, I don't know, like different perspectives rather than spatial itself or topographic itself could be very interesting.
All right, is there anyone else who wants to introduce? I didn't keep track of who already went, so feel free to introduce if you haven't yet. No pressure. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, this has been really interesting. I feel like the ideas that are circulating are already much more interesting than what I imagined coming into this seminar. So I'm really excited to see where they go and how they can connect. And hopefully this can become sort of its own virtual microclimate tied into all these different spaces that you're part of. We just have a few minutes left, but does anyone want to share any more thoughts or questions or anything? I'm curious. We didn't really talk about like the Blaise Cendrars writing, and that's okay. I mean, I think there's some really interesting sort of images and crossover between the space, the kind of ecological space and the imaginary. But the writing also has some obvious flaws, like around tropes that it uses occasionally and things like that. But I just didn't want to leave it completely unaddressed. But I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that they want to share before we wrap up, but we don't have much time.
I just thought some of his writing was really beautiful and it was fun to read. Some of it was difficult for me to imagine, but then at the same time, some of the lines were really lovely, like his piece about honey. Life is pragmatically, manifestly, and formally space and time sublimated, molten, and perfumed honey. It was really interesting. And I don't know who he's quoting. I think I've heard this quote before but I didn't look it up. None could define a blade of grass without involving the whole universe. But yeah, anyway, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and that was written in 1917, which kind of I think is pretty amazing. Any other thoughts or last kind of questions or before we wrap for the week? So yeah, just as a reminder, it'd be great if half of you could come with a microclimate to present. Just an example. Does not have to be fully fleshed out or anything, just something to present. It can even be from your personal experience. It can be totally unrelated, something that you found out in the world, anything that you want to share. And then yeah, I'll send along that link to the film for next week. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you then. And yeah, I'm excited to sort of open this space to Ali. And yeah, hopefully you'll have some sort of intuitions or some questions or some responses to bring to him once we get started next week, based on the film and the readings and whatever you want to share. But yeah, thanks again. This has been really amazing. I mean, a lot of times this can feel like a very solitary kind of pursuit. Sometimes, like the contemplation maybe that Jones was talking about before, and some of these questions. So it's really fun to feel like we can connect about this, and yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. So thanks a lot for being here. And yeah, I'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.